You're wearing a uniform to your wedding. Disgraceful. 5 words flashed across my phone screen, illuminating the dim, quiet hallway outside the chapel doors. My heart skipped, not in fear, but recognition. The number wasn't saved, but I didn't need a name to know exactly who had sent it. The bitterness embedded in those words was as familiar as the ache that followed them. Colonel Frank Holstead, my father, a man whose blood ran thick with military pride and whose heart had long ago been locked behind medals, discipline, and silence. I stared at the text, my eyes narrowing at that final word, disgraceful. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, yet somehow my father had managed to cast a shadow even from a distance. Growing up in the Holstead household had been like living in an army barracks without ever having enlisted. Our family photo was always meticulously aligned at perfect 90-degree angles, shoes polished daily, meals precisely served at 1800 hours sharp. Dad's voice was never loud, it didn't need to be. It was sharp, precise, calculated, the tone of command. Dinner conversations were short, efficient, a tactical debrief rather than genuine family time. Love was implied, never spoken. From the earliest days of my childhood, it was clear I was not the soldier my father wanted. Born a girl into a family legacy meant for sons, I was reminded at every turn of what I could not become. I remember the first time he took me to an Army-Navy football game when I was 10. He hadn't taken me to enjoy the atmosphere or to bond. He took me to show me, firsthand, the world I'd never be allowed to join. "You'll never wear those colors," he had said quietly, standing at attention beside me, his jaw clenched beneath a stoic expression. "Leave the uniform to the men who can handle it." That night, instead of tears, I chose silence. I hid my pain beneath quiet resolve. I knew even then that the best revenge wasn't found in confrontation, but in perseverance. My room became a shrine to his career, photos from Vietnam carefully framed, medals displayed in glass cases that I was forbidden to touch. Yet, in secret, I studied his commendations, memorized the names and details of each ribbon, and learned every military regulation before I was even old enough to drive. My mother was the gentle buffer against his steel. She had a quiet strength, wrapped in cardigans and poetry books. Every night she would read me lines from Emily Dickinson, her voice soft as she brushed hair from my eyes. "You are my little stormbird," she would whisper. "Never let anyone clip your wings." Her words became my compass, guiding me through the storm of silence from my father. My mother believed in possibilities, not barriers, and quietly nurtured my ambitions, even as my father systematically dismantled them. At 18, when the thick envelope from the U.S. Naval Academy arrived, it felt like destiny delivered in navy blue and gold lettering. I held the letter in trembling hands, heart pounding with pride. I had earned this, every bit of it. When I showed it to my father, his reaction was devastatingly predictable. He stared at the letter for a long, unbearable moment, his expression unmoving. Then, calmly, he said, "You're serious about this nonsense?" "I am," I replied firmly, trying not to let my voice quiver. He said nothing further. For 2 months afterward, my father's silence spoke louder than any words he could have uttered. He skipped my graduation ceremony, canceled our Saturday breakfasts, and withdrew deeper behind his impenetrable wall of discipline and disappointment. My mother tried tirelessly to bridge that gap, sending care packages filled with granola bars, tea, and handwritten poems during my first, brutal year at Annapolis. One particularly hard night, when a drill instructor had relentlessly screamed in my face, my composure finally cracked. I called home in tears, and my mother's calm voice was the balm that steadied my trembling hands. "Storms aren't meant to stay grounded, sweetheart. Let the winds harden you, not break you." Her words were a lifeline through every exhausting drill, every harsh evaluation, and every dismissive glance that followed a woman in uniform. Yet, even my mother's quiet support could only hold so much weight. 3 years into my academy training, breast cancer took her quickly and cruelly. My father did not call. He did not write. He sent a brief email, 3 cold sentences. The funeral was nice. I hope the Navy is treating you well. I still don't understand your decision. It wasn't an apology, or comfort, or even grief. It was resignation. After graduation, the divide between us became a chasm. Each accomplishment I achieved widened it further. I rose through ranks swiftly, becoming the youngest woman to attain Rear Admiral in my command. Each promotion, each ribbon earned was met by a cold, stinging silence from my father. Yet here I stood, decades later, dressed proudly in my pristine white uniform, gold buttons polished, for stars gleaming on my shoulders. Behind me waited my teammates, soldiers who had fought, bled, and trusted me with their lives. In front, beyond these chapel doors, 200 Navy SEALs waited, alongside the man I was about to marry, a man who understood me more deeply than my father ever had. But now, a text message threatened to reopen old wounds. The word disgraceful burned in my hand, but no longer pierced my heart. I had moved beyond his judgment long ago. Today, I was choosing to stand proud in the uniform I had fought for, earned through sacrifice, pain, and honor. I deleted the message decisively, smoothing the cuffs of my sleeves, and drew in a deep, steady breath. The chapel doors opened. The rich scent of polished wood filled the air as the thunderous call echoed from inside, breaking through decades of shadows and silence. Admiral on deck. I stepped forward, my stride sure, ready to walk down the aisle toward my truth, not as my father's daughter, but as the woman I had forged myself to become. The first time I stepped through the gates of Annapolis, I felt the weight of 1,000 invisible eyes upon me. The crisp, disciplined air was electric, humming with expectation, and as I stood there, clutching my duffel bag tightly, I knew this was exactly where I belonged, despite my father's silence ringing louder than ever in my ears. The academy grounds stretched out in front of me, imposing buildings of historic stone and marble, structures built by tradition, discipline, and a history that seemed to echo with every step. A wave of nervous anticipation rolled through my chest, and for just a moment, my father's words returned, "You'll never wear those colors." I squared my shoulders, set my jaw, and marched forward anyway. That first year at Annapolis was grueling in ways I'd never imagined. The physical demands were relentless, mornings that began long before dawn, endless drills, push-ups on cold pavement until our arms shook, miles of running in brutal weather. But none of that compared to the emotional isolation. As one of only a handful of women, I had to prove myself daily. There were skeptical glances in the mess hall, whispered doubts, and open challenges from those who thought I was only there to fulfill a quota. Late one evening, after lights out, I lay awake in my bunk, aching from the day's training, staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling. The quiet was broken by a soft rustle near my pillow. My heart quickened. Reaching beneath it, I pulled out a crumpled note. "You don't belong here. Quit while you still can." I glanced around. The room was dark, filled with sleeping cadets. I crumpled the note tighter in my fist, a spark igniting in my chest, not of anger, but of determination. Whoever had written that note had underestimated me. They didn't know I was already forged from rejection, strengthened by a lifetime spent fighting shadows cast by my own father. Instead of discarding the note, I tucked it carefully into a small metal box beneath my bed, alongside my mother's handwritten poems, photographs of home, and my acceptance letter to Annapolis. This was now part of my arsenal. Each doubt thrown at me would become fuel for my resolve. My first year passed in a whirlwind of sweat, struggle, and silent victories. While my father remained distant, my mother's gentle support arrived consistently in weekly care packages filled with herbal tea, granola bars, and envelopes scented faintly of lavender. Each note carried a simple message, "Fly strong, Stormbird." But soon those packages grew thinner, the handwriting shakier. Then one autumn evening, my phone vibrated quietly on my desk. It was my mother's number, but my father's voice answered. "Your mother's in the hospital," he stated flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. "She wants you here." I arrived at the hospital to find him standing stiffly by the window, arms crossed tightly over his chest. He glanced briefly at my uniform, clean, pressed, and proud, then turned away, saying nothing. Inside the room, my mother lay pale and fragile, her smile bright but weary. She reached for my hand, her touch cool against my palm. "You came," she whispered. Of course, I choked out, fighting tears. "I'm always here for you." She squeezed my fingers gently. "Don't let him break you," she said softly. "Promise me." "I promise," I whispered fiercely, holding her hand until she drifted off to sleep. Days later, she was gone. Her funeral was quiet, somber. My father stood stiffly throughout the service, refusing to look at me, refusing even to acknowledge my presence. His silence hurt, but it didn't surprise me anymore. As they lowered her casket into the cold earth, I tossed in a single dried lavender sprig, whispering quietly, "Fly free, Mom." Back at Annapolis, grief hardened into renewed purpose. I excelled academically, tactically, physically. Each ribbon, each promotion became a silent tribute to my mother's memory and a subtle defiance of my father's indifference. Upon graduation, I received my commission as a Navy officer with honors, yet as the crowd erupted in applause, I noticed the empty seat where my father should have been. Even then, disappointment didn't strike me, only clarity. His absence no longer defined me. My first deployment was to Okinawa, a seemingly mundane assignment. Logistics and paperwork, far removed from the heroic frontlines I'd imagined. But I poured myself into the work, meticulous and uncompromising, proving quietly yet consistently that I was as capable as any of my male counterparts. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught me something invaluable. True leadership wasn't about rank or recognition, it was about responsibility and integrity, especially when no one was watching. After Okinawa, my next assignment brought me closer to the sharp edge of real warfare, a covert operation off the Somali coast. On a blistering afternoon, a routine reconnaissance patrol spiraled suddenly into chaos. Gunfire ripped through the air, a violent storm of bullets and fear. 2 sailors were wounded, one critically, trapped between rusting shipping containers and open ground littered with debris. I didn't hesitate. Ignoring protocol, I sprinted toward them, adrenaline surging through my veins. Bullets ricocheted nearby, metal shrapnel slicing through my uniform. Grabbing the wounded sailor, I pulled him into cover, blood soaking into my hands as I struggled to stem the bleeding. Radioing desperately for extraction, I forced calm into my voice, leadership under fire. We survived. The wounded sailor survived. But something changed in the way the men saw me that day. They began calling me Iceback, a nickname that spoke less of coldness and more of strength under impossible odds. The incident gained the attention of senior command. I was awarded commendations and medals, quietly pinned to my chest during formal ceremonies. Yet each time, my eyes scanned the crowd, secretly hoping to see my father's proud, approving face. He never came. The years that followed brought more promotions, more responsibilities. Each achievement I quietly shared with my father through letters and photographs. Each was met with silence, but I continued sending them, not out of naive hope, but as reminders to myself of how far I'd come without his approval. Then, one crisp morning, an envelope arrived bearing the insignia of Naval Personnel Command. I broke the seal, my heart quickening as I read the words, "Congratulations on your promotion to Rear Admiral." At that moment, tears blurred my vision, not because I needed validation, but because I finally understood the full scope of my journey. I had climbed this mountain alone, fueled by determination, forged through pain and sacrifice. My father's approval was irrelevant. I had earned this rank, not inherited it. Standing before my team later that day, proudly wearing the new stars on my shoulder, I spoke words I'd learned through experience. Leadership isn't about seeking approval. It's about choosing courage when fear whispers doubt. They stood in unison, saluting not just my new rank, but the person I had become. And for the first time, I truly believed what I'd always hoped: I belonged here, and nothing could ever change that. The morning of my wedding dawned crystal clear, the sky a perfect canvas of deep navy blue, as if the world itself had decided to salute the occasion. The air smelled faintly of polished brass and fresh linen, and the distant sounds of gentle waves lapping against the shore offered aid. 2 sailors were wounded, one critically, trapped between rusting shipping containers and open ground littered with debris. I didn't hesitate. Ignoring protocol, I sprinted toward them, adrenaline surging through my veins. Bullets ricocheted nearby, metal shrapnel slicing through my uniform. Grabbing the wounded sailor, I pulled him into cover, blood soaking into my hands as I struggled to stem the bleeding. Radioing desperately for extraction, I forced calm into my voice, leadership under fire. We survived. The wounded sailor survived. But something changed in the way the men saw me that day. They began calling me Iceback, a nickname that spoke less of coldness and more of strength under impossible odds. The incident gained the attention of senior command. I was awarded commendations and medals, quietly pinned to my chest during formal ceremonies. Yet each time, my eyes scanned the crowd, secretly hoping to see my father's proud, approving face. He never came. The years that followed brought more promotions, more responsibilities. Each achievement I quietly shared with my father through letters and photographs. Each was met with silence, but I continued sending them, not out of naive hope, but as reminders to myself of how far I'd come without his approval. Then, one crisp morning, an envelope arrived bearing the insignia of Naval Personnel Command. I broke the seal, my heart quickening as I read the words, "Congratulations on your promotion to Rear Admiral." At that moment, tears blurred my vision, not because I needed validation, but because I finally understood the full scope of my journey. I had climbed this mountain alone, fueled by determination, forged through pain and sacrifice. My father's approval was irrelevant. I had earned this rank, not inherited it. Standing before my team later that day, proudly wearing the new stars on my shoulder, I spoke words I'd learned through experience. Leadership isn't about seeking approval. It's about choosing courage when fear whispers doubt. They stood in unison, saluting not just my new rank, but the person I had become. And for the first time, I truly believed what I'd always hoped: I belonged here, and nothing could ever change that. The morning of my wedding dawned crystal clear, the sky a perfect canvas of deep navy blue, as if the world itself had decided to salute the occasion. The air smelled faintly of polished brass and fresh linen, and the distant sounds of gentle waves lapping against the shore offered aid. Those words lifted the heaviness from my shoulders. I glanced one last time at my reflection in the mirror, standing straighter, taller, letting the medals and stars speak their silent truths. I had earned every stitch, every commendation, every scar, and no one, not even my father, could diminish that. As I moved toward the chapel doors, Marcus and Senior Chief Torres flanked me protectively. Torres had lost his leg in a mission years ago but remained one of the strongest men I knew. He glanced over with a steady look, determination clear in his eyes. "You led us through hell, Admiral," he murmured, pride resonating through his voice. "Allow us to lead you through peace." My throat tightened at their gesture of loyalty, and I nodded quietly. The chapel doors opened slowly, revealing the sanctuary beyond. The wooden floor shone like glass, reflecting light from stained glass windows that painted patterns across the pews. The air felt charged, filled not with tension but with solemn respect, the kind earned through trust built on shared hardship. I stepped forward, each step deliberate, precise, resonating deeply through the quiet space. 200 Navy SEALs rose to their feet in unison, their posture impeccably straight, uniforms immaculate. Their eyes met mine, not with passive observation, but with a collective understanding, a silent acknowledgement of battles fought side by side. These were warriors who'd seen me at my strongest and weakest, who'd trusted me without hesitation, who had become my family in every meaningful sense of the word. A voice boomed clearly through the chapel, deep and powerful, filled with reverence: "Admiral on deck." The sound was overwhelming, echoing through every fiber of my being. For the first time, a flood of pride welled inside me, not pride in rank or title, but in the recognition that these men and women understood exactly who I was. The child who had once been dismissed by her father now stood undeniably seen and honored. As I moved slowly down the aisle, my eyes locked with James at the altar. He stood tall and quiet, confident in a navy blue suit perfectly complementing my uniform. His gaze was calm, steady, filled with a depth of quiet strength that matched my own. Beside him stood the Navy chaplain who had served with us overseas, his uniform decorated similarly, signifying shared experiences and bonds forged in fire. Halfway down the aisle, my vision blurred briefly. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. I wished, for just a moment, that my father could witness this, not to vindicate myself, but to show him the reality he had refused to accept. I pushed the thought aside, regaining focus. Today wasn't about proving anything to him, it was about celebrating who I had become and the family I had chosen. Yet, unknown to me at that moment, someone else had noticed my father. From across the street, he stood rigidly in full dress uniform, hidden in shadows, unwilling or unable to enter. His presence, however fleeting, was a testament to the complexity of his pride and prejudice, present yet absent, bound by his own unresolved struggles. At the altar, James stepped forward, grasping my hands gently yet firmly. He leaned in slightly, his voice a quiet anchor amidst the waves of emotion. "I don't need vows to tell me I'm married to your courage," he whispered softly, eyes locked with mine, honest and unwavering. My breath caught slightly, heart swelling with gratitude and love. "And I choose to serve beside your strength," I replied firmly. Our vows, simple and genuine, promised understanding beyond the surface, through deployments, separations, trials, and triumphs. We vowed to protect not merely each other's hearts but also each other's peace and purpose. As the chaplain declared us husband and wife, the chapel fell silent, reverent rather than tense. Then, slowly at first, applause rose thunderously, breaking like a powerful wave against the quiet reverence, genuine and heartfelt. As James and I turned, my team lined the aisle, raising crossed sabers, a traditional salute reserved typically for officers but, today, performed spontaneously by enlisted sailors who had chosen respect over protocol. At the reception, modest yet vibrant on the nearby base, Chief Petty Officer Marcus approached me quietly. His normally stern face softened, eyes filled with sincerity. "Ma'am," he began, voice slightly rough with emotion, "we didn't stand today for your rank. We stood because you never once made us feel small." I swallowed hard, touched deeply by his honesty. He pulled me into a brief yet genuine embrace, rare and powerful. Near midnight, after toasts, laughter, and celebration, I stepped outside to breathe the cool night air. James joined me, standing quietly, observing the gentle moonlight dancing on distant waves. "Did you hear from him?" he asked carefully. I nodded. "He called it disgraceful." James considered my words, his voice gentle. "Do you believe that?" I paused, reflecting deeply, then looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "No. Not anymore." He smiled quietly, intertwining his fingers with mine. "Then that's all that matters." As I leaned into him, peace settled firmly within me, a profound sense of belonging not to my father's expectation but to the family and life I'd built for myself, piece by piece, battle by battle. Today, in uniform, surrounded by the respect of those who truly knew me, I finally understood fully, real honor doesn't come from blood, it comes from choosing courage over silence, truth over tradition, and self-respect over approval. In the weeks following my wedding, life settled into a gentle rhythm, a comforting peace I had rarely allowed myself to experience. James and I retreated briefly to the coast of Maine, where the mornings were painted in soft fog, and evenings faded beneath skies scattered with stars. Here, life was uncomplicated, days filled with laughter, conversations about the future, and the quiet warmth of companionship. Yet, amidst the tranquility, a distant shadow lingered at the edges of my mind. My father's absence from the wedding had been expected, his silent disdain familiar, but something inside me couldn't fully let it rest. Perhaps it was the lingering ache of unresolved conflict, or perhaps simply the unspoken desire for closure. One cool morning, as James and I sat quietly on the porch of a seaside inn, savoring blueberry pancakes, he gently placed my phone beside my coffee cup. A message blinked gently on the screen. "It's from your cousin Claire," he said softly. I glanced down, my heart tightening instinctively. Claire had rarely contacted me over the years. The Holstead family was not known for warmth or open communication. Hesitantly, I opened the message. It contained 2 photographs, no words necessary. In the first, unmistakably rigid and proud, stood Colonel Frank Holstead in his full dress uniform, shoulders squared, jaw tight, eyes fixed sharply toward the chapel entrance from across the street. He had been there, present but unwilling to step forward, unwilling to breach his wall of silence. The second photograph captured him mid-turn, walking away, his stance unchanged but shoulders slightly lowered, as if bearing the weight of regret he could not openly acknowledge. My throat tightened unexpectedly. James leaned closer, noticing my reaction. "Are you okay?" I nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the photographs. "He was there," I said softly, barely audible above the distant crash of waves. "He came but couldn't cross the threshold." James watched me silently, compassion in his gaze. After a quiet pause, he asked, "Do you want to reach out to him?" Did I? The question lingered heavily in the air. It had always been easier to ignore my father's silence, to shield myself behind walls of my own. But perhaps now, in the wake of recognition and newfound peace, those walls no longer served their purpose. "I don't know yet," I whispered honestly. When we returned home, a new routine settled in. I received invitations to speak at military events, conferences, and leadership seminars. My reputation had quietly grown, not just as a capable admiral, but as a transformative leader. It was during one such invitation, a closed-door event at the Pentagon, that the next shift occurred. The invitation was clear: "Admiral, we'd like you to speak on ethical leadership and the future of command." It was exactly the type of forum I'd always hoped for, yet it felt different now, weighted with purpose beyond personal achievement. I agreed instantly, sensing it was an opportunity not only to speak but to heal, to turn silence into meaning. That evening, as I stood behind the podium, facing rows filled with seasoned commanders, officers, and policymakers, my voice steadied into clarity. "Leadership is not about the volume of your command, but about the calmness of your example," I began firmly, eyes meeting theirs one by one. "I've learned that true respect isn't inherited through rank or title, it's earned through actions, courage, and integrity." I paused, allowing my words to sink in. But integrity also requires vulnerability. It demands we confront not only external enemies but internal biases, the hardest battles we'll ever fight. My voice softened, though it resonated with conviction. I was raised by silence. Silence disguised as strength, as discipline. But silence is rarely strength, it's often fear masked as control. True strength is openness. True command inspires trust, not fear. The room fell profoundly quiet, and for the first time publicly, I allowed myself vulnerability. I once received a letter from a sailor, an instructor who ended his own life. His final note simply read, "Tell Admiral Holstead thank you. She's the only one who ever saw me." A painful silence filled the room, heavy yet necessary. This is why I stand here, not for medals or recognition, but for him and those like him. True leadership sees beyond uniforms and ranks. It sees humanity. The applause was slow, deliberate, deeply respectful. As I stepped off the stage, several officers shook my hand warmly, expressing gratitude, respect, and even emotional vulnerability themselves. It felt like a quiet victory, not over my father, but over the silence that had defined us both for far too long. The following morning, another envelope awaited me at my office, handwritten, no return address. My breath caught at the familiar handwriting, my father's distinct block letters. With hands that trembled slightly, I opened the letter carefully. The words were stark yet meaningful. I didn't enter the chapel because I didn't know how to sit among people who saw in you what I refused to see myself. I didn't salute, not because you didn't earn it, but because I no longer knew how to honor what I didn't understand. I was wrong. If you'll let me, I'd like to talk. No uniform, no protocol, just a father trying to understand a daughter he never took the time to know. Frank. I sank slowly into my chair, eyes blurred by sudden tears. James appeared quietly at the doorway, noticing my expression. Wordlessly, I handed him the letter. After reading, he carefully set it down, eyes gentle. Do you want to meet him? A long silence filled the space between us, punctuated only by the distant hum of office activity. I don't owe him anything, I finally replied, voice quiet yet firm. No, James agreed gently, but maybe you owe yourself the chance for closure. I considered his words carefully. The anger I had felt toward my father had long since dulled into a quiet sadness, but perhaps James was right. Perhaps closure was something we both needed, not to repair a broken bond but simply to acknowledge the truth that existed between us. A week later, dressed carefully in my uniform, I met my father at Arlington National Cemetery. He waited quietly, dressed in civilian clothes, his posture less rigid than I remembered. You look like your mother when you stand like that, he murmured awkwardly, breaking the silence. The conversation that followed was painful yet necessary, words exchanged about regret, grief, and the silent damage done over decades. Eventually, without warning, he straightened into a slow, deliberate salute. It was imperfect, sincere, and powerful. I returned it, not as forgiveness but acknowledgement, a step forward from silence into understanding. A year to the day after my wedding, I stood beneath the lights of an auditorium at the Department of Defense's annual Leadership Summit, a plaque in my hand and applause echoing around me. I had just accepted the Excellence in Ethical Command Award, a recognition not only for my service, but for the systems and reforms I had implemented across units, quiet changes that had saved real lives. James was in the front row, his eyes shining with quiet pride. But it was the figure seated a few rows behind him that caught my attention most. Colonel Frank Holstead, my father, rose slowly to his feet. His posture was no longer rigid, but purposeful. This time, there was no hesitation, no inner war playing out across his features. He brought his hand up to his brow in a full salute. A real one. Crisp. Earnest. And for the first time, I felt it land, not as an apology, but as a recognition. After the ceremony, the two of us walked together into the evening air. The sky was soft with the glow of early spring dusk. Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence was no longer heavy, it had transformed into something else, mutual acceptance. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from one of my former SEALs. Still thinking about your wedding day, ma'am. Never seen that many warriors cry during a ceremony. That was the day we realized something, blood didn't salute, but we did. I showed the message to James. He read it, smiled gently, and asked, "You going to respond?" I typed back. Some gifts can't be returned. But some salutes? They stay with you forever. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't vindication. It was recognition, not just from my father, but from everyone who had walked with me, served with me, bled beside me, and believed in me when others didn't. 6 months later, I was asked to lead a joint operations initiative, designed to restructure inter-branch training protocols and introduce ethics-based leadership models. It was a project I would have dreamed of 20 years earlier. Now, it felt like the legacy I was meant to leave behind. As part of the initiative, I returned to bases I hadn't visited in years, some of them the very ones where I'd once been called quota, or watched others be cut down by outdated systems that measured strength without regard for resilience or empathy. At one particular base, I recognized a name on the training roster, Corporal Avery Patterson. My breath caught. I remembered the sailor I had dragged out from behind that shipping container in Somalia. The one who had nearly bled out in my arms, who still sent Christmas cards each year. His daughter. Named after me. Now, she wore boots and fatigues, standing tall among the next generation. She approached me after a training session, shy but composed. "Ma'am," she said, saluting. "My father always said you saved his life, not just his body, but his purpose. That's why I joined." I looked into her eyes, and I saw legacy, not built through bloodlines, but through impact. Sometimes, the world underestimates quiet leadership. But quiet doesn't mean weak. I had spent my career proving that resilience was not the loudest voice in the room, but the most consistent presence. That empathy wasn't softness, it was structure. Later that year, I was approached by the Defense Education Initiative, asking to turn my methods into a nationwide program for training ROTC instructors. It wasn't glamorous work, there were no medals for writing policy or mentoring future trainers. But it mattered. And when they asked what to call it, I said simply, "Call it the salute standard. Not for what's worn, but for what's earned." Just before the program launched, a final letter arrived. Cream envelope, thick cardstock. The return address was handwritten, but I recognized the script immediately. It was from my father. Inside, he had written, "I watched your speech. I've read your proposals. You built a career that wasn't about proving anyone wrong, not even me. You built it to save lives. And I finally see that now." I missed the standing ovation, but I hope I haven't missed my chance to stand beside you, even in a small way. Dad. Enclosed was a single photograph from my wedding, one I had never seen. Taken from the back of the chapel, it showed 200 men and women standing at attention, saluting. And in the far corner, partially silhouetted, stood my father, arms at his sides, watching. Not saluting. Not yet. I stared at the image for a long time, tracing every figure, every face. This one photo, so full of weight and timing, reminded me how long it can take for someone to change, and how even the smallest gestures can mean everything. Weeks later, I invited him to attend the ROTC keynote address for the launch of the salute standard. He came. Sat quietly in the back. Said nothing. But afterward, as I stood shaking hands with cadets and instructors, he approached. He wore a suit. No insignia. No pins. Just a cap in hand and eyes softer than I had ever seen them. He extended his hand. "I'm proud of you," he said. Then, more quietly, "And I'm sorry it took me so long." I shook his hand, not because the past didn't matter, but because we had chosen to move forward. James later asked, "Do you think you've forgiven him?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "Forgiveness isn't a transaction," I said. "It's a path." And today, we took a step. That night, as James and I sat side by side beneath a wide sky, I reflected on the journey. Not the medals. Not the rank. But the people. The moments. The battles won quietly, not with force, but with principle. Some people think power is about crushing what once crushed you. But I've learned that the most lasting kind of power, the kind that heals instead of destroys, is the power to build what they never believed you could. You don't always have to swing back. Sometimes, you just have to stand tall. And let them look up to reach you. In a world where approval is often sought in echoes of tradition and bloodlines, this story reminds us that true honor isn't inherited, it's earned. Through every battle fought, not only on foreign soil but within the confines of family expectations and silent disapproval, the Admiral's journey became a testament to the unshakable strength of loyalty, courage, and truth. She remained loyal, not to those who withheld their love, but to her own values and to the people she led with integrity. She showed courage, not only under gunfire, but in every moment she chose to walk forward without validation, to lead with principle in the face of invisibility. And above all, she lived in truth, a truth carved not from defiance, but from a relentless commitment to become exactly who she was meant to be, regardless of who refused to see it. The salute that once didn't come from her father eventually did, not because she demanded it, but because she no longer needed it. In the end, it wasn't vengeance that brought resolution, but recognition, earned through quiet resilience and unwavering authenticity. The greatest legacies are not built on proving others wrong, but on proving to ourselves that we can rise beyond pain, lead with empathy, and stand tall in the very uniform they told us we weren't meant to wear. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: sometimes, the most powerful kind of strength is not in the roar of triumph, but in the quiet dignity of a salute that finally arrives, not for what you wore, but for who you chose to become. Because in life, the most lasting victories are not those shouted from the stage, but those quietly built, day by day, into the person no one believed you could be.